So, good evening. Happy Lag BaOmer. We are beginning the 24-hour day of holiness, godliness, and spiritual energy that exists in the air on Lag BaOmer. And we celebrate Lag BaOmer as a very unique holiday. It's a very obscure holiday in the Jewish calendar. Many people who, observe traditional holidays do not even know about it. It's not one of the big ones. It doesn't have any specific mitzvahs connected with it. Everybody who knows anything about Judaism knows about, blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah or apple and honey or, the sukkah or the matzah or things like that. But who ever heard of Lag BaOmer, right? Well, Lag BaOmer is actually a day that became a holiday in the time period around the destruction of the temple, which is when the great Tana, the great sage in the times of the temple, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was leading the Jewish people. So we've mentioned Rabbi Akiva many times in our classes. Rabbi Akiva was one of the greatest sages in the time period right before and after the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Akiva began his life as an illiterate shepherd. And at the age of 40, he started learning Torah for the first time. He learned the Hebrew alphabet at the age of 40. He entered a classroom with a bunch of 3-4-year-old boys to sit down and learn Torah. And he became the foremost leader of the Jewish community. In fact, all of his greatness is 100% attributed to his wife, who sent him to learn and encouraged him and supported the family on her own so that her husband could learn. And he spent 24 years growing to become this incredible teacher who had thousands upon thousands of disciples. And one of his students, one of the 5 students who followed in his path and who continued his legacy was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was living during the times when the Roman emperor was in control of the Jewish people. And in fact, I was actually reading a children's book about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to my kids last night. He was overheard saying something negative about the Roman emperor, and he was sentenced to death. And he had to go into hiding. And he spent years hiding in a cave with his son. And during the time when he was in this cave hiding, he learned the secrets of the Torah. And that is the root of all of the esoteric, deep, meaningful explanations of the Torah that help us understand not just how to do mitzvahs, what the Torah says, what the law is, but the beauty and the connection and the deeper meaningful experience of Judaism, understanding our souls, understanding what our connection with God is. All of that stems from this time in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's life when he wrote the Zohar. And before he passed away, he asked that the day of his passing be a celebration, that we should rejoice on the day of his passing. The day of his passing is the 33rd day of the Omer, which is the 18th day in the month of Iyar, tonight, which is what we celebrate Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is a day when we can absorb all of the beauty and the energy and the spirituality that existed in his life. Because on the day of a tzaddik's yahrzeit, the day of the anniversary of the passing of a tzaddik, a righteous person, everything that he accomplished in his life becomes permeated in the world for us to access. So for someone like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived his life uncovering and explaining the deep meaning of the Torah, that energy is available to us during this 24-hour period. And when we connect to it, we can understand the Torah in a deeper way, and it can illuminate our entire Torah learning for the entire year. So Lag BaOmer is a day of spirituality. It's a day of rejoicing. It's also a day of pure fun and pride in being Jewish. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe instituted that we have what's called a Lag BaOmer parade. In fact, in New York, during the times when the Rebbe was alive, going back 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, during that time period, the Rebbe would stand outside. He would come outside on the steps of 770 Eastern Parkway, which was the Rebbe's synagogue, and he would stand outside for hours. And there was a parade, and every child from all the schools in Brooklyn, around the tri-state area, people would fly in. They would pass by in a parade of Jewish pride. And they would hold signs, and they made floats depicting Jewish scenes and Jewish mitzvahs and things like that. And the Rebbe would stand and wave and smile to everyone who passed by. Now we're talking about a day of such holiness, such a holy man like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You'd think that he would spend the day learning Torah and spending hours in prayer and doing very holy introspective things because it's such a holy day. And yet he spent that time energizing the entire world to display our Jewish pride. So it's a day when we gather together and we celebrate the fact that we are part of the Jewish community and that we have Jewish pride and that we are celebrating our connection with God. And of course, that celebration stems from our connection with the Torah, because our connection with Torah and our connection with God is 100% intertwined. So this is the idea of Lag BaOmer. And as we started off by saying, Lag BaOmer is a time when we want to have extra study of Torah. We want to study the deeper meaning of the Torah in a way that it relates to us, which is why, like I said, even though there were parties planned and different things people had planned for Lag BaOmer, I said, I'm not canceling tonight's class. And I'm so grateful to everyone who's here to be with me as we learn Torah together, because this is the time to add in Torah and to add in ways that we can bring Torah into our own lives. So on that note, we're going to move into the third section of our series on the Pirkei Avot. To backtrack a little bit, we are going through the ideas that we can apply to our lives and make meaningful from the ethics of our fathers, which is read every Shabbat between Passover and Shavuot, which is the time period that we are in now. And we covered chapter 1 and chapter 2 in our previous classes. Last week we missed a class, so we did not cover chapter 3. So we're going to take a little bit of chapter 3 and a little bit of chapter 4 this week together and discuss several important ideals that we have found in Pirkei Avot. So we're going to actually start with the first part of chapter 4. So we will tie it into something connected in chapter 3, but for now we're going to start with chapter 4. So we're actually on page 282 if you have a siddur in front of you. And if you don't have a siddur, don't you worry. I'm going to pull up the text on the screen. So bear with me just a moment as we get chapter 4 on the screen. Where are we in chapter 4? The text. Please give me a heads up as soon as you see the screen share so I know it's working.
It's working.
It's working. Okay, perfect. So we are in the first part of the chapter 4, starting with Aleph. Ben Zoma Omer. Ben Zoma would say. Anybody want to read? All right, Fortuna, please read. Go. Beautiful. So Ben Zoma was a very great sage. He was a very wise and learned sage. In fact, the reason why he is called Ben Zoma, which literally means the son of Zoma, and his first name, which I believe was Shimon, is not even mentioned over here. And the reason that he is called by Ben Zoma, the son of Zoma, is because he was wise and learned when he was such a young child that everybody just knew him as the young son of Zoma. People didn't even know his name yet, and they already recognized his brilliance in Torah. And that name stuck. He was always called Ben Zoma, the son of Zoma, because from a very young age, he displayed such great brilliance in Torah learning. And this is what he says. And he gives 4 statements. Who is wise? Who is strong? Who is rich? And who is respected? Who is honored? And for each one, he gives the answer. Now it's interesting because each of these 4 characteristics are things that people want to be. Everybody wants to be wise in whatever field, right? Everybody wants to be smart. Everybody wants to be strong. Everybody wants to be rich, and everybody wants to be honored and respected. These are 4 core priorities that people have. Now, what they mean is different to different people. But Ben Zoma gives us a very clear path to attaining these 4 goals. And we're going to go through each one of these, and we will see a very fascinating thread of connection between all of them. And this thread of connection between all of them gives us an insight into the perspective that a person should have in order for us to develop ourselves and become better people, become better communicators, become better people in our relationships. In fact, this part of Pirkei Avot is better than almost any self-help book you're going to read. Clear, to the point, with very beautiful perspective. But we're going to start from the bottom. We're going to start from number 4. Number 4, who is respected? Who is respected? How does a person earn respect? Age, wisdom. Okay. Okay. Those are all good answers. Ben Zoma gives a different one. He says, who is respected? Someone who respects others. By respecting others, we earn our respect. Which means that the respect that a person receives is not because of what they have accomplished, but because they are a respectful person. Now, I was having a discussion with my students today, my 5th grade students, and some of them got in trouble because they were being rude to a substitute teacher. And I had a chat with the girls, and I told them, I said, listen, we both know that none of you would have said this to me. You've never spoken to me like that. You've never spoken to your principal like that. You don't speak to your general studies teacher like that. Why would you speak to the substitute like that? And they started giving answers. Well, we were bored. Well, whatever, all kinds of different answers. And finally, I told them, I said, listen, if you are respectful to me, but you're not respectful to the substitute teacher, then you're not actually a respectful person. You're just scared of me. That kind of caught them off guard. What was the idea that I was trying to make, which I ended up having a long discussion with these girls, is that a respectful person is respectful to everyone because they are a respectful person. In fact, in the Torah, we learn that, hello, Beth, welcome,
Hi.
that we learn that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, when he went to speak to Pharaoh, he spoke in a respectful tone. Could you imagine? We're talking about Pharaoh, the king who enslaved the Jewish people, who killed Jewish babies, who tortured the entire Jewish nation. And Moses is now coming to ask Pharaoh to tell him, let my people go, or the plagues will come and whatever. And we see that the tone that he used was respectful. Why? Because we have the mitzvah to respect royalty. Could you imagine? Why was he being respectful of Paro? Paro didn't deserve respect. It's true. Paro did not deserve respect. But Moses was a person who valued being respectful. So he used a respectful tone in every situation. He was still demanding. He was still assertive. He wasn't a pushover, but he was respectful. And that's what made him so respected. He respected every single Jewish person in the entire community. In fact, what made Moses deserving of the job, what made God know for sure that he's the right one to be the leader of the Jewish people? Because when he was shepherding the sheep and one little lamb ran away, he went after that lamb and brought it back and fed it water. And God looked at Moses and said, someone who notices the feelings of even a tiny lamb. Shepherds in those days, they would take extra lambs home, nobody would notice, and they would slaughter them and enjoy the meat. To care for a little lamb that ran away out of an entire huge flock, that's someone who has respect for individuals. So what is it, Ben Zoma saying, that makes a person respected is their innate respect for everyone. Who the person is and their values, regardless of others. So for the student in the classroom, the really respectful student will be respectful to the teacher that they're scared of, will be respectful to the teacher they love, and to the substitute teacher that's just doing nothing in the classroom and the girls want to have a free time. Because if a person is respectful, then it doesn't matter who they're speaking to. And that is how a person ends up garnering respect themselves, because they deserve that respect, because they exude that respect. That is number one. Again, focused on the inner value and how it relates to the people around us. Now we're traveling up. Remember, we started off with number 1 was wise, number 2 was strong, number 3 was rich, number 4 was respected. So we're starting from the bottom up. Number 4, we said we know what it means to be respected. Now we move into rich. Now, Ezehu Ashir Hasamech Bechalko. This is what Pirkei Avot is telling us. Who is rich? Someone who is happy with what they have. Now, I always listened to that and thought that is the biggest cop-out. Basically, the Torah is telling us, what? You want to be rich? Sorry, you can't be rich, so you may as well be happy. Really? What does that mean? Well, there's 2 aspects to it. First of all, if you're happy with what you have, then you will always feel rich. Always feel rich. If you're not satisfied with what you have, then no matter how much you have, you'll never feel like it's enough. What is the point in a person's life where they're categorized as rich? What makes a person rich? Rich, at least from my perspective, I look at it like, who is rich? A person who has everything they need. If you're not lacking, then you're rich. If you're lacking, then you're not rich. So really, everyone's threshold for riches is different, because everyone has different needs and everyone is satisfied with different things. So for someone who has this need to live in a huge mansion and have tons of staff working for them and they have huge business and everything going perfectly, then until they have that, they're not rich. Someone who has a great desire to have a huge fleet of fancy cars, until they have that fleet of fancy cars, they don't feel like they're rich, or whatever it is. So rich means different things to different people, because it's really a matter of what you're satisfied with. So if a person is happy with what they have, then they truly are rich, which gives everyone the ability to feel rich. But it still feels like a cop-out, because what if you really do want more? What then? What if everybody wants more, but you can want more and be satisfied? But what if you're not satisfied? This isn't a statement of if you're not satisfied, then you are not rich. This is actually the best way to get rich. And I should really write a book on how to get rich, or I should just become rich myself. I mean, other than the rabbi's salary and the teacher Rebbitzin salary, we're very rich, thank God, in all of the things that we're satisfied with. But I don't have a yacht in my backyard that doesn't have a pool. And for me, that's not riches. But what if I wanted that? What if a person wants more and they're not satisfied? Well, then, how does a person become rich? They need to be happy with what they have, which means they have to look at themselves. Each one of us, we have to look at ourselves and we have to see, well, what do I have? That doesn't just mean in your possessions and the things that you have accumulated. It means, what do I have within me? What are my talents? What are my strengths? What are my abilities? What are my opportunities? And how can I use those to get me what I want? If a person is not happy with their abilities and they try to do what somebody else is meant to do, then they'll never really be successful, because you're never going to be as good as the other person if you're not really good at that, and they are. But when you recognize your strength and your talent and your opportunities, and you're happy with it and you're confident with it, use that to get you what you want. Because nobody will be as good as you if you are really doing what you're best at. And if you are doing your very best, that is the vehicle through which God will give you the blessing of riches. Because God gave you that opportunity. God gave you that talent. God gave you that strength, which means that God wants you to use that to get you what you want. So if you try to use somebody else's strength in order to get rich, well, that's not going to work, because that's not where your blessing lies. So number one, in order to feel rich, we need to be happy with what we have. And once we're happy with what we have, then we are truly wealthy. But if we do feel like we want more, then we need to start by being happy with the talents and the abilities and the opportunities that we have. When Hashem presents us with a situation that we are in, and we choose to be happy about it, and we're happy with what we have, then we can truly capitalize on that situation and have the best outcome. So if a person feels like, I don't want to use this strength that I have, I want to become rich by being, and I'm going to give a very banal example, but we'll all understand it in however it applies in our own lives. If a person decides, I want to become rich and famous as a dancer, but they have 2 left feet, they will never succeed. But if a person has a beautiful ability to connect with children, and they find confidence in that strength, then their best chance of success is using that talent. Side note, don't plan on ever becoming rich from teaching, but whatever it is, if you plan on working with children, if that's your strength, find a field that will get you to your goal in a way that you're happy with what you have. But don't try to be a dancer, because even if you'll take all the dance lessons in the world, It's not your gift. You might become a good dancer, but you'll never be as talented with the one who was born spinning, because that's not your gift. That's not the vehicle that Hashem gave you through which to find success. And this is the second thing that Ben Zoma is telling us. How can we be rich? By being happy with what we have. Again, it's a focus on forget about everybody else. Focus on what God has given you. So again, we saw with respected. Forget about what other people are looking at you for. Focus on how do you behave towards other people? And that is how you gain respect. With being rich, how do you feel about yourself? How are you using the talents that God has given you? And then the riches follow. Moving up to the next one, which is my personal favorite. Who is strong? What makes a person strong? Now, strong is a very big buzzword, especially for women. A strong woman, an empowered woman, a woman with power, right? Everybody wants to be strong. There's such high praise for a person who is strong. What does it mean to be strong? Does strong mean that you're stronger than someone else? People often think that. In order to be considered strong, you have to be the strongest, right? If you're the strongest in the room, then people look at you that you're strong. That is a very false understanding of strength, because that means your strength depends on the strength of everyone around you. So in one situation, you'll be strong because everybody else is really weak. And in another situation, you'll be weak because somebody's much stronger. So it's not really your own worth if your strength is dependent on the strength of everyone around you. So what does it mean to be strong? Pirkei Avot here teaches us, Ezahu Gibor, who is a strong person, Hakovesh es Yitzro, one who conquers his Yetzer. Yetzer in Hebrew refers to the inclination, specifically the evil inclination that is within each person. Every single person has two inner voices. We have the godly voice and we have the beastly voice. What does that mean? Our godly voice is the voice inside us that is striving to connect to godliness, striving to do things for a higher purpose. The beastly voice is the voice inside us that's pushing us to behave like an animal. And I don't say that in a negative way. I mean it in a literal sense. What is the characteristic of an animal? An animal is programmed, so to speak, to care for its own needs without anybody else. The animal doesn't take into consideration decisions based on the feelings of others or based on a higher power or anything like that. And of course, there is a range between the intellect of animals. But in a general state, the difference between a human and an animal is the ability to make choices and think on a higher level and be able to communicate and do things for a higher purpose that affect the world in a positive way. So the animal inside of us not necessarily wants to do bad things, just wants to do selfish things, wants to do instinctive things. What characterizes an animal most is its inability to wait. An animal needs something and wants it right then. That's the way God programmed an animal, so that it should be able to survive on its own without a caretaker, that animals are able to just get their needs on their own. Now, what is the animal voice inside us, which in the Tanya refers to as the nefesh habehamit, which literally means the animal soul? That is the voice inside us that is pushing us to do things just for our own benefit. Now, that is not a bad thing. We need to do things for our own benefit, for our survival. But when there's a struggle between the two voices, one voice inside us is telling us to do things for a higher purpose, and the other voice inside us is telling us to do things for our own selfish reasons. And that is where a person who is strong is someone who is able to conquer that inner voice. Now, we know that we are, as definitely as we're praying for the safety of those in Ukraine and in Russia and everywhere where there is war, it's not so far off for us to imagine a country trying to take control over another country. It's not an old story. It's several weeks ago. How long ago was it when Putin invaded Ukraine and this whole situation happened? What was his goal? He wasn't trying to wipe out Ukraine. He wasn't trying to wipe them off the map. He wasn't trying to kill the Ukrainians and decimate the land completely. He was trying to conquer it. What does that mean? That he should have full control over what takes place in that territory. That's what it means to control. The two souls inside us are compared to two cities that are at war, where one is trying to control the other. Who is the strong one? What makes us strong? It's when our godly voice controls our animal voice. Not that we don't do things for our own benefit, not that we don't do the things that we need to do. We don't do self-centered things. We do them, but they're dictated by the godly voice inside us, which means that our instinctive actions are based on our godly aspirations, which means the beastly voice inside us is telling us, you're hungry, eat. The godly voice inside us is telling us, make a blessing before you eat. Elevate that meal to something holy. The animal voice inside us is telling us, go to sleep, you're tired. The godly voice inside us is telling you, wait, say the Shema prayer before you go to sleep. So the godly voice has control over the selfish voice inside us. That is what makes a person strong. What makes a person strong is the ability to control not everyone around us, but ourselves. And this doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. True strength is when you're able to control yourself, so that when you do things, you do it from a place of meaning, from a place of purpose, from a place of productivity, rather than a place of instinct. I want it, I need it, I got it. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the marshmallow experiment, just in case not. The Stanford University, oh, okay, I'm not sure. I'm going to explain. The marshmallow experiment was done in 1970 or something, I don't remember. Stanford University conducted an experiment with children where, and this experiment has been done, you can, if you Google marshmallow experiment, you will find many videos of it. It's very cute. There's very, very many videos of people doing it all the time. I still plan on doing it with my children. What was the experiment? They put young children in a room and they put a marshmallow in front of them. And each child on their own or in pairs, whatever it was, is a marshmallow sitting in front of the child. And the adult tells the child, here's a marshmallow. I'm going out of the room and you can choose. You can eat it or you can wait. If you wait, when I come back, you'll get a second one. And they leave the room. Now, there's usually a hidden camera in the room for the purpose of the experiment. They wanted to see the children's reactions, to see what the children do. And we see that some children wait, and some children eat, and some children nibble, and some children smell, and whatever it is. And they conducted this experiment to see different types of children. And they noticed that some of the children ate the marshmallow. They couldn't hold themselves in. Like that, that's it. You know, they couldn't hold back. They just ate the marshmallow. In fact, the video I was watching, I was laughing so hard because one of the kids, before the adult is even out of the room, she just ate it. I don't want a second one. I just want it now, right? And then you have the one that nibble and nibble, like as if like there was an apple core, the middle of the marshmallow was left. And others waited and they were so excited they got the second one and stuffed them both in their mouth. And they followed these children into adulthood. And it's now many years later. This experiment was conducted in the 70s. And they concluded with this experiment that those children who were able to wait and who understood the idea of delayed gratification were much more productive adults because they were able to make smarter decisions and see the bigger picture. And they had the inner strength to decide what is the right choice, not just on, I want to do this right now, so I do it, but rather on long-term goals and long-term rewards. So for these young children, the one who said, I don't care about the long-term getting to, I want it now, was a very different way of thinking than the child who said, well, let me wait because long-term, I'm going to have more, I'm going to get to. And this idea of delayed gratification, which was studied extensively in this university and in many other studies, is actually a very, very major focal point of Jewish life. Delayed gratification is built into Jewish lifestyle. You're hungry, you want to eat, we don't gobble our food, we make a blessing, which means we stop before we eat, the food is right in front, and we stop, we thank God, and then we eat. The same is with marriage. In a Jewish marriage, there is a beautiful system of taharat hamishpacha, family purity, in which there are times of intimacy and there are times of separation. And I'm throwing this out there that if anybody who is in a Jewish marriage and wants to have a refresher course or learn about this, it is a beautiful mitzvah which enhances marriage, enhances Jewish life, and really has an impact on the entire family and the women in particular. What is the idea? That there are times when you can be physically intimate with your spouse, and there are times where you're not. And you focus on the friendship aspect of your relationship. And it's an incredible system because it makes marriage fresh and exciting all over again because you can't get bored of it because there's always the on and off period. So this delayed gratification enhances the beauty of a relationship. It's built into Jewish life. There are so many things in our Jewish life. On Shabbat, you want to go on your phone or whatever it is, we wait because we don't use our phone during the time of Shabbat. There's so many things. And this helps us build our inner strength so that our godly voice can be the one that dictates the course of our decisions and controls our inner instinctive voice so that we make decisions from a place of holiness, from a place of productiveness, from a place of wisdom. So again, we see that the strength that Ben Zoma is talking about here has nothing to do with anybody else and has everything to do with ourselves. So we see so far this very interesting thread. You want to be respected? Focus on yourself. You want to be rich? Focus on yourself. You want to be strong? Focus on yourself. Starting to get a little self-centered here, huh? Is that the idea? Focus on yourself, forget about everybody else? Well, that's why we went backwards. Because what is number one? Who is wise? We need wisdom in order to be strong. We need wisdom in order to be rich. We need wisdom in order to be respected. And what is the way to gain this wisdom? Who is wise? He who learns from every person. So yes, in order to accomplish all of these goals, we have to focus on ourselves, our values, and what we need to work on. But we can't think for 1 second that we have all the answers. We need to learn from other people. I was having a conversation with my students in seminary, which is the college for Jewish girls post high school, to focus on Judaic studies. There's a seminary in Hallandale. I teach there on Tuesday mornings, and the course that I'm teaching, surprise, is Pirkei Avot. I like to overlap my courses, and it's very interesting to have these conversations with, the same conversation with different people from different walks of life. And I was having this conversation with the girls, and these girls all live in a dorm. They have come to spend the year in Florida from all over the world. And one of the girls tells me, she's like, this lesson really resonates with me. I said, why? Care to share? And she says, I think that was the biggest lesson I learned this year, is that you can learn something from everyone. She said, I live in a dorm and there's so many different types of people. And at the beginning of the year, I said, listen, she's telling me this is what she told herself. She said, either I'm going to spend my year judging everyone or learning from everyone. And I decided to learn from everyone. I said, well, that makes you wise, because there's so much we can learn from every person if we look at a person and we're open to what they can teach us. We can look at a person and judge them and recognize every flaw and recognize everything that we're better at than them and everything that they're doing wrong and everything that we would change. And it's so easy to do that. And once you go down that rabbit hole, that's it. You're never going to find anything good about anybody ever, because all you're going to see is, no, I don't like this person. No, not so much. No, not so much, right? Then there's the opposite. You can look at this person, every person that you meet, and you can see, well, what is it about them that they can teach me? Because if there's a difference, you can either say, well, I'm better, which is often our first instinct, or we can replace that instinct with, what can I learn from that person? That is actually the most effective tool to avoid passing judgment on people. Because it is human nature that when you meet someone, you notice what is different about you. That's human nature. When you meet someone, you notice the things that they do that are different than you do. And to tell yourself, well, don't look at the differences, only look at what you have in common, is not really practical, because it's not human nature. And Torah doesn't tell us to do things that go against our nature, because God gave us our nature. So we do need to do things that work within our nature. But we're told not to judge people. In fact, in Pirkei Avot, it says not to judge people. That we should judge every person favorably. We shouldn't pass negative judgment. So then, if it's our human nature to notice the things about every person that's different, but we can't judge them, then we need something to do to replace the negative act of judging. That's what it is. See what you can learn from them. You don't have to act like them. But what is a lesson that they have in their life that you can incorporate into yours? So if everyone was exactly the same as us, then we wouldn't have anything to learn from anybody. But because we are different, therefore we can learn from each other. And then we become wise, because we have so many opportunities to learn new things. And then we can incorporate those things into our own lives to help us become strong, to help us become rich, to help us become respected. because we don't look at ourselves as perfect beings. We look at ourselves as people who can learn from others. So here, when Ben Zoma is stating something that is so simple, it is so profound. And when we look at these ideals from the Torah, which are listed here in Pirkei Avot, from the perspective of understanding the deeper meaning, the Hasidic meaning of Pirkei Avot, we uncover an incredible guide towards achieving self-fulfillment, towards becoming wise and smart and rich and respected and happy and everything else that comes along with it. Because it's right here in the Torah. And this is a profound, profound lesson that we can see in this Torah, in this Pirkei Avot. Which brings us now, as promised, to a part of chapter 3. So, if you're in your Siddur, it is page 281. And if you are looking at the screen on Zoom, I'm going to share it with you. It is number 17. And I'm going to ask someone to read. We're going to read the first phrase of part 17. So let me share the screen here so we can see. And anybody on Zoom would like to read? Just unmute yourself if you want to read. Okay, don't all answer at once. All right, Laura, you've been appointed.
Okay. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Azariah,
Very good.
thank you, would say, there is no Torah, there is no common decency. If there is no common decency, there is no Torah.
Stop right there. Now, in the Siddur, there's a slightly different translation. It says over here, proper social conduct, common decency, the same idea. This is what Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said. Im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. If you don't have Torah, then you don't have the proper social behavior. If you don't have common decency. And if you don't have common decency, then you don't have Torah. What is this idea? This entire sentence epitomizes the entire reason why we learn Pirkei Avot. Remember, we said when we started the introduction to Pirkei Avot, we said this entire tractate in the Mishnah is focused on personal development as people. And it's interesting because it is smack in the middle of an entire set of books discussing laws, ways of keeping mitzvahs, back and forth halachic debates and things like that. And then all of a sudden, this is talking about our behavior as humans and our conduct in the world and the way we behave interpersonal relationships and things like that. And it seems so out of place. Is it Torah or is it social skills? Is it Torah to talk about how to be wise, how to be rich, how to be happy, how to be all of these things? Is that Torah? Isn't Torah like, the do's and the don'ts and how to keep the Torah law and halacha and things like that? Well, this is what Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah is teaching us. Im ein Torah, ein derech eretz. Without Torah, there is no common decency. And the flip side as well. If there's no common decency, then there's no Torah. What does that really mean? First of all, Torah, God determined the way social behavior should be. In every generation, there were different standards of morality. What is considered okay nowadays was not considered okay 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. What was considered proper social behavior hundreds of years ago is not considered proper social conduct today. So how can a person know what is truly the proper way to behave? what is the compass that we can use to set the correct direction? Like, where is our north? If the map is always changing, then we don't really truly know where north is, right? If you have the compass, but it's always moving around and you don't know where north is, then how do you know where to go? We need that all eternal, everlasting moral code to determine what is truly acceptable behavior. And that is the Torah. If we're ever unsure is this behavior appropriate, and we don't know what is appropriate behavior, we can always rely on the Torah, because the Torah is the word of God, and God is the one who created us people. So if we want to know how people should act, well, we should follow the creator of the people. Just like when you want to know how to use the washing machine, you won't write your own manual. You're going to read the manual of the one who created this washing machine, because they know best. Now you could try and figure it out, and it could be it'll work, but it won't work to capacity. It might break down after a while. And we see that when society creates its own standards of morality, those standards don't last because they're man-made. The only standards of morality, the only standards of social behavior that we can always depend on being right and correct are the ones dictated by the Torah. But im ein derech eretz ein Torah. Without common decency, there is no Torah. Which means, if a person spends their life immersed in spirituality and learns lots of Torah and is brilliantly knowledgeable in Torah, but they don't have common decency, then their Torah is worth nothing. And that is why in the Mishnah, we learn about proper behavior and proper conduct and proper social dynamics that exist in the world and that we should live by, simply because it is part and parcel of living a spiritual lifestyle. So here Pirkei Avot is teaching us that it goes hand in hand. We want to be spiritual and we want to be kind, and we need to be both. We want to be learned and we want to be sensitive to the feelings of others, and we need to be both, because we really cannot have one without the other. And it goes on to say many others, which are very fascinating. If you don't have this, then you don't have that, and vice versa, which if anybody wants to continue reading in chapter 3 of Pirkei Avot, has many fascinating partners, value partners, so to speak, that if you have this, they have to go hand in hand with other things. For example, it says, if you don't fear God, then you don't have wisdom, because then your wisdom is only based on your own perception and not based on anything more elevated than your own wisdom, which isn't true wisdom. And if you don't have knowledge, there's no understanding. If you don't have understanding, there's no knowledge. Similarly, it says also that if there is no flour, then there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. Flour refers to kemach, meaning livelihood. That if a person thinks that they're just going to learn Torah a whole day, and they're not going to go out and earn a livelihood, that's a ridiculous thought, because if you don't have a livelihood, if you can't live, then you don't have time to learn Torah. It has to go hand in hand. There's so many beautiful comparisons of different values that need to go hand in hand. But first and foremost, we need to know that the way we behave towards other people is just as important as the way we behave towards God. And we need to find the way to balance both. That was one of the ideals that Rabbi Akiva lived with, and he imparted to his student Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we are celebrating here on Lag BaOmer. One of the reasons why we celebrate Lag BaOmer, aside from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which we spoke about in the beginning, is the fact that the plague which Rabbi Akiva's students were dying from stopped on this day. So to backtrack for anyone who missed our last classes, during the period of Sefirat HaOmer, which is the time period between Pesach and Shavuot, is also a time period of mourning. And we are mourning the fact that Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students who perished in a plague. And it was very, very sad. And our sages tell us that the reason why they perished, the reason that was given, and I want to make a very important distinction that when we say the reason why they died, that does not, God forbid, mean that we can justify their deaths and say, well, they deserve to die because of this. But the reason that their behavior was stated was that we should learn a lesson from them is the fact that they didn't respect each other. They didn't respect each other's differences. And that is a flaw that is discussed by our sages to teach us a lesson on how we should behave with each other. Think about it. These were Torah scholars of the highest caliber. Okay, so they were a little rude to each other. Okay, they weren't sensitive to each other's feelings. Shouldn't their Torah learning have trumped it all? No. Because im ein Torah, ein derech eretz, and im ein derech eretz, ein Torah. Their Torah study was not of value enough to be able to overlook the fact that they were not sensitive to each other's feelings. Now, these are great sages who couldn't set aside their differences of opinion, and they suffered terribly because of it. So should they have just been nice to each other and not learn Torah? No. We need to find a way to balance both. So today on Lag BaOmer, we are celebrating the balance of both. The balance of learning Torah and gathering together as a community to celebrate Jewish unity. Which is why we are celebrating here in our community, we're celebrating both. Tonight is about the Torah learning. Tomorrow is about the unity. So we have accomplished the Torah learning tonight. Tomorrow, barbecue is all about unity, right? We want to balance both self-development and learning Torah and gaining Torah knowledge while still finding ways to learn from each other and still uniting with each other and being sensitive to the needs of other people and connecting with other people, because we don't live in a bubble. We're part of a community. So on that note, I'm going to wish everybody a joyous and meaningful and spiritually elevated Lag BaOmer, and continue learning Torah, continue with our Pirkei Avot. We have, this week was for chapter 3 and 4 because we missed last week, right? This Shabbat we read chapter 4 in Pirkei Avot, but it's for both. So feel free to look into more detail. And if you want the text of any more information about it, you can post on the chat. I will gladly send you a link to more information, or you can read it from the Siddur. And let's develop our Torah learning, but let's also connect as a community. Whether you do it tomorrow at 5:30 here at the barbecue, or if you do it anywhere else, connect with other people. And together we can find a way to strengthen our unity, to strengthen our relationships with each other, and recognize that when we see differences between other people, it's so we can learn from each other. It's so that we can gain wisdom from their unique perspectives. And in that way, we can truly be wise, be strong, be rich, and be respected. So l'chaim to that. Happy Lag BaOmer. If anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself.
No question.